Life has a peculiar way of teaching you lessons, often through the people you love the most. For me, that lesson came wrapped in the guise of my son's marriage, a joyous occasion that, in retrospect, became the catalyst for the greatest revelation of my life. My name is Eleanor, and this is the story of how a secret, an inheritance, and a mother's intuition saved me from a fate worse than loneliness, utter exploitation. My husband, Robert, was the anchor of my life, a man of quiet strength and boundless dreams. He was the kind of person who saw beauty in the untamed and potential in the overlooked. Our greatest shared dream was the ranch. Not just any ranch, but a sprawling 200-acre property nestled in the hills, complete with an old farmhouse, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and acres of rolling pasture. It was a place he'd discovered years ago, a wild, beautiful expanse that spoke to his soul. We'd bought it together, a testament to our shared future, but practicalities kept us in our modest suburban home. The ranch was our weekend escape, our sanctuary, a place where we'd walk hand in hand, planning for a retirement that, tragically, Robert would never see. His passing was sudden, a cruel twist of fate that left an emptiness in my chest that time could only dull, never truly fill. The world felt muted, colors less vibrant, laughter a distant echo. In the haze of grief, the legalities of his estate felt like an insurmountable burden. When the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called me in for the will reading, I expected the usual: our house, his savings, perhaps a few investments. What I didn't expect was the ranch. Robert, in his infinite wisdom and foresight, had left the entire property free and clear, solely to me. No caveats, no shared ownership with our son Michael, just mine. Mr. Henderson, a kind man who had known Robert for years, looked at me over his spectacles. "Eleanor," he said gently, "Robert was very clear. He wanted you to have it, to do with it as you pleased. He knew what that place meant to you both." He then added, almost as an afterthought, "And perhaps he wanted to ensure your future, unburdened." His words, so simple, resonated deeply. A premonition? A safeguard? I didn't know then, but I held on to them. I decided instinctively to keep the ranch a secret. Michael was still raw from losing his father, and I didn't want to add any financial complexities or expectations to his grief. I simply told him that his father's estate was straightforward, and that the ranch, which he knew as our weekend getaway, had been sold years ago, a necessary measure Robert had taken for some investment or another. It was a white lie, born of an unsettling intuition, a quiet voice in my heart telling me to hold this close. Michael, bless his heart, accepted it without question, too consumed by his own sorrow to probe deeper.
Then Tiffany entered our lives. She was a whirlwind of blonde hair, sparkling eyes, and an infectious, if a little too practiced, laugh. Michael had met her at work, and within months, he was smitten. I wanted to be happy for him, truly. He deserved joy after such a loss. Initially, Tiffany seemed charming, attentive, and surprisingly good at drawing Michael out of his shell. She'd bring me flowers, compliment my cooking, and listen intently to my stories about Robert. But slowly, subtly, cracks began to appear in her polished facade. Conversations would invariably veer towards material possessions, towards upgrading their lives, towards the kind of wealth that seemed to be her ultimate goal. She'd casually mention her friends' extravagant weddings, their designer bags, their lavish vacations. My small, comfortable home, filled with memories and love, seemed to shrink under her unspoken scrutiny. I noticed how she'd subtly redirect Michael's attention away from my advice, how her gaze would linger on my modest jewelry, how she'd inquire, a little too often, about my financial stability. My intuition, that quiet voice, grew louder. This wasn't just about love, it was about lifestyle. It was about what Michael, and by extension, his family, could provide. And so the secret of the ranch remained locked away, a silent shield I didn't yet know I would desperately need. The engagement was announced with great fanfare, mostly orchestrated by Tiffany. The ring was ostentatious, far beyond what Michael, a junior accountant, could comfortably afford. The wedding planning became an Olympic sport, with Tiffany as the demanding coach. Every detail had to be perfect, every expense justified by the need to make a statement. I found myself dipping into my savings more than I'd ever intended, pressured by Michael's earnest pleas and Tiffany's thinly veiled expectations. "Mom, it's just this once. Michael would say, his eyes pleading. Tiffany really wants this. It's important to her. And because I loved my son, because I wanted him to be happy, I acquiesced, again and again, each time feeling a faint tremor of unease. The wedding itself was a spectacle, a grand ballroom, a 5-course meal, a live band that cost more than my car. Tiffany was radiant, a vision in white, but her smiles rarely reached her eyes when she looked at me. It was a day of polite smiles and strained conversations. I watched her, watched my son, and a cold dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't the Michael I had raised, not entirely. He was becoming a shadow of the man he once was, molded by Tiffany's insistent desires.
Life post-wedding quickly shed any pretense of normalcy. Tiffany, now my daughter-in-law, felt emboldened. The subtle digs at my home became overt criticisms. "Eleanor, darling, don't you think this sofa is a bit dated?" she'd say, running a manicured finger over the fabric of my beloved, comfortable couch. "And this wallpaper, so quaint." She'd redecorate my kitchen in her mind, rearrange my furniture, always with a condescending air of helping me. Michael, surprisingly, would often nod along, or at best offer a weak, "Now, Tiffany." It stung deeply. My home, a sanctuary of memories with Robert, was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman who saw it only as an old, inconvenient relic. But the real pressure began when they decided they needed a bigger house. Their small starter home, which I had helped with the down payment for, was suddenly too cramped, unsuitable for entertaining, and not reflective of their future aspirations. Tiffany began a relentless campaign, subtly at first, then with increasing directness, to get me to sell my home. "Eleanor, you're in such a big house all by yourself," she'd begin, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Why don't you downsize? Move into a lovely senior living community? Or better yet, we have a spare room. You could live with us. Imagine how much easier it would be for everyone." The spare room was a glorified storage closet, barely big enough for a twin bed. The implication was clear. I was to liquidate my assets, hand over the proceeds to them, and become a convenient live-in babysitter and housekeeper, confined to a small corner of their grand new life. Michael, my son, my flesh and blood, started parroting her lines. "Mom, it makes sense financially," he'd say, avoiding my gaze. "You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance, bills. We'd all be together." He painted a picture of familial bliss that was utterly devoid of my actual feelings or autonomy. I felt a cold fear grip me. They weren't asking, they were demanding. My home, my independence, my very identity were all on the chopping block. I tried to explain. "This house holds so many memories, Michael. It's where your father and I built our life." But Tiffany would cut in. "Memories don't pay bills, Eleanor, and frankly, it's holding you back. Think of all the equity you're sitting on." Her eyes, once sparkling, now glinted with an unsettling avarice. The requests escalated. They needed a new car, a more prestigious address, help with their investment opportunities. Every conversation was a thinly veiled plea for money, for my resources. I was no longer a mother, a person with her own life and feelings. I was a bank account, a means to an end. My heart ached for the son I felt I was losing, for the man who was so easily swayed by a woman whose love seemed conditional on financial gain. The breaking point came during a particularly tense Sunday dinner at their home. The air was thick with unspoken demands. Tiffany, after a few glasses of wine, became bolder. "Eleanor," she announced, leaning forward, her voice a little too loud, "Michael and I have been discussing it, and we really think it's time for you to make a decision about your house. We've even looked into some assisted living facilities for you. They're quite lovely, with bingo nights and everything." My blood ran cold. Assisted living? Bingo nights? I was 62, perfectly healthy, and still ran a small online craft business. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about clearing me out. "Tiffany," I began, my voice trembling with suppressed anger, "I am perfectly capable of living on my own, and I have no intention of moving into an assisted living facility." Michael, surprisingly, chimed in. "Mom, she's just trying to help. It would make things easier for us too. That house is a drain on your resources. You could give us the money from the sale, and we could finally get that bigger place we need." He actually said us. Not you, not your future. Us.
The betrayal was a physical blow. Tiffany smirked, a cruel, triumphant glint in her eyes. Exactly. You're a burden, Eleanor. An old house, old money problems. It's time you contributed to your son's future, properly. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The grief, the hurt, the fear, the simmering resentment, it all coalesced into a quiet, steely resolve. The secret I had held for so long, the precious gift from Robert, suddenly felt like a weapon, perfectly forged for this very moment. I took a deep breath, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "You're right, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm, almost eerily so. Their eyes widened, expecting my surrender. It is time I made a decision about my house. And I have. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Michael looked confused, Tiffany expectant, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "I won't be selling my house," I continued, meeting Tiffany's gaze directly. "And I certainly won't be moving into an assisted living facility, or your guest room, which incidentally is far too small for a grown woman." I saw a flicker of annoyance cross Tiffany's face. "In fact," I said, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my lips, "I'll be moving out of my house next month, but not into any place you've suggested." Michael frowned. "Then where, Mom? What are you talking about?" "I'm moving to the ranch," I announced, the words feeling like pure, unadulterated freedom. My ranch, the one Robert left me in his will, the one I never told either of you about. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany's jaw dropped, her perfectly made-up face contorting in disbelief. Michael looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. The ranch?" Michael stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "But you said Dad sold it years ago." "I did," I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. "A white lie. My intuition, I suppose. And thank God for it. Robert left it solely to me, free and clear. It's 200 acres with a beautiful old farmhouse, just waiting for me to make it my home." I watched as the realization dawned on them, slowly, horribly. The sheer scale of what they had assumed I didn't have, what they had tried to strip from me. Tiffany recovered first, her face a mask of furious indignation. You kept this a secret from us, from your own son? How could you? That's family property. We could have helped you manage it. We could have lived there." Her voice rose with each accusation, laced with a venom I'd only suspected before. "It's not family property, Tiffany," I corrected, my voice firm. "It's my property, a gift from my husband. And I kept it a secret because I had a feeling, a deep, unsettling feeling, that if you knew this exact conversation would eventually happen, that my resources would become your resources, that my independence would be seen as a burden to be relieved for your benefit." Michael, pale and speechless, finally found his voice. "Mom, how could you do this to me, to us? We're your family. That's a huge asset. You could have helped us so much." His words were not of concern for me, but of profound, self-pitying disappointment that their gravy train had been derailed. I looked at my son, the boy I had loved and nurtured, and saw a stranger. "You made your choices, Michael," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, but resolute. "You chose to stand by and watch as your wife tried to strip me of my home, my dignity, and my future. You chose to demand my money, my assets, for your aspirations. You chose to see me as a burden, not a mother. I've made my choice now. The ranch is my home. It's my sanctuary, and it will remain mine and mine alone." But we're family," Tiffany shrieked, standing up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You can't just cut us out. We have a right to that. We're your son's family." "You had a right to my love, my support, my kindness," I retorted, rising to meet her furious gaze. "You squandered it. You showed me your true colors. And frankly, Tiffany, I wouldn't trust either of you to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a 200-acre ranch. So no, you will not be living there. You will not be helping me manage it, and you will certainly not be benefiting from it." I walked out of their house that night, leaving them in their stunned, greedy silence. The drive home was a blur of emotions: sorrow for the son I felt I'd lost, anger at Tiffany's audacious entitlement, but most of all, a profound sense of relief and liberation. The secret had been my shield, and now it was my freedom. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity.
I put my suburban house on the market, packed my belongings, and began the joyous task of moving to the ranch. It was an undertaking, to be sure. The old farmhouse needed work. The barn needed repairs. But every nail hammered, every coat of paint applied, was a step towards rebuilding my life on my terms. I hired local contractors, made new friends in the rural community, and slowly, the ranch began to hum with new life. Michael tried to reach out, of course. His calls were a mixture of anger and thinly veiled attempts to still access the ranch. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We need to talk about this, about our family, about the ranch." I told him, calmly, that the ranch was not up for discussion, that my family was a concept he and Tiffany had redefined for me, and I was simply accepting their definition. If he wanted to reconnect, it would be as my son, not as an aspiring beneficiary. Tiffany, predictably, went on a smear campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was a cruel, selfish mother-in-law who had hidden an inheritance from my own son. But the story sounded less credible with each retelling, especially when word got out about the scale of the property and their previous attempts to force me out of my old home. Most people, it turned out, understood a mother's protective instincts. Life at the ranch is everything I dreamed of, and more. The air is clean, the stars are brilliant, and the only demands are from the land itself. I've started a small vegetable garden, adopted a couple of rescue dogs, and found a peace I hadn't known since Robert passed. I see Michael occasionally, though our relationship is strained. He's still with Tiffany, still chasing the elusive dream of wealth, though I hear their financial struggles have only deepened. He's a different man, hardened by bitterness, still unable to truly see the wrong in his actions. He still hasn't apologized, not truly, for what they tried to do. Sometimes I walk the sprawling acres, feeling Robert's presence in the rustling leaves and the vast open sky. I thank him silently for his foresight, for giving me this gift, this sanctuary. He knew I would need it. And I thank my own intuition, that quiet voice that told me to keep my cards close to my chest. Because in the end, that secret, that ranch, didn't just save my home or my finances. It saved my life, my spirit, and my dignity, proving that sometimes the greatest act of love is also the greatest act of self-preservation.